When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez confidently locked eyes with Vice President JD Vance on live national television and venomously branded him a poverty tourist, she was absolutely certain she had just delivered a fatal, career-ending knockout blow, entirely oblivious to the terrifying reality that her meticulously curated political brand was about to be ruthlessly and systematically dismantled piece by piece in front of 30 million transfixed viewers. For 6 high-profile years in Congress, she had successfully broadcasted a compelling narrative to the American public, demanding they believe she was the ultimate, authentic voice of the struggling working class. Yet, on this historic evening, she found herself seated directly across from a man who had not merely observed the crushing weight of systemic poverty, but had actually been forged in its unforgiving fires. The resulting collision between a carefully manufactured political persona and a fiercely undeniable lived reality was so profoundly brutal, so deeply personal, and so utterly irrefutable that it left the most famously prolific talker in the modern progressive movement completely paralyzed, unable to utter a single syllable. She had stepped onto that stage, convinced her rehearsed soundbite would instantly trend, painting her as the undisputed hero of progressive media by morning. She could not have been more catastrophically wrong. Instead of a viral moment of triumph, she was subjected to 15 agonizing minutes of the most devastating, data-driven obliteration of a political identity in the history of modern televised debates. It was a complete dismantlement delivered not with theatrical rage, shouting, or petty insults, but with the remarkably quiet, steady, deeply unnerving Midwest, nice cadence of a man who possessed the unshakable confidence of having survived the very life his opponent only utilized as campaign material. What unfolded under those glaring studio lights was an event of such raw, unvarnished truth that no public relations team could ever spin it, and no carefully constructed image could ever survive it. It was the undeniable moment a genuine working-class survival story collided head-on with a glossy, focus-grouped imitation broadcast live without the comforting safety net of an audience or a teleprompter, leaving absolutely nowhere to hide. To fully grasp the sheer magnitude of this televised confrontation, one must first understand the profoundly divergent trajectories that brought these two distinct individuals to the exact same stage. Both belonged to the exact same generation, yet their origins could not be more diametrically opposed. J.D. Vance entered the world in 1,984 inches, the heart of Middletown, Ohio, a quintessential American steel town, slowly suffocating under the weight of industrial decline and economic despair. His formative years were defined by traumatic chaos as his mother spiraled through an endless, agonizing revolving door of rehabilitation centers and fleeting romantic partners. The only fragile thread holding his fractured world together was his fiercely devoted grandmother, affectionately known as Mama, a woman who maintained absolute order through a formidable combination of colorful profanity, an affinity for firearms, and an abundance of fierce, unconditional love. Escaping the gravitational pull of his hometown, Vance enlisted in the United States Marine Corps at 18, serving his country in the deserts of Iraq before utilizing the GI Bill to secure an education at Ohio State University. From there, his sheer force of will propelled him through the hallowed halls of Yale Law School, leading to the publication of his culturally seismic memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, a successful venture into the world of venture capitalism, a coveted seat in the United States Senate, and ultimately the vice presidency. In stark contrast, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was born in 1,989 inches, the Bronx, New York, but the crucial formative chapters of her youth were actually written in the manicured, profoundly affluent enclaves of Yorktown Heights, nestled safely within the wealthy borders of Westchester County. For those unacquainted with the socioeconomic geography of New York State, Westchester County stands as a bastion of generational wealth, consistently ranking among the most affluent regions in the entire country. Raised by an architect father, she enjoyed the distinct privilege of attending Yorktown High School, a remarkably well-funded public institution equipped with a lacrosse field and a competitive robotics team. She later pursued higher education at Boston University, a prestigious institution bearing a formidable $40,000 annual price tag. It was only after graduation that she embarked on the brief stint as a bartender and waitress that would eventually serve as the absolute cornerstone of her entire political mythology. Riding a wave of insurgent energy, she captured a congressional seat in 2018 at the incredibly young age of 29, becoming the youngest woman ever elected to Congress. Both politicians vehemently claim to be the authentic voice of the overlooked working class. Both passionately assert that they possess a profound, intimate understanding of the daily agonies endured by ordinary Americans. Both have meticulously engineered their national profiles around economic populism. Yet, when stripping away the polished rhetoric, the inescapable reality remains. Only one of these two individuals purchased their very first professional interview suit off a rack at a local Goodwill for a mere $12, while the other famously graced the glossy, exclusive cover of Vanity Fair, draped in a designer ensemble valued at an astronomical $14,000. On this historic night, seated mere feet from one another, America learned the devastating difference between living a hardship and merely performing it. The atmosphere inside the CNN studio in Washington, D.C., had been deliberately engineered to maximize the gravity of this unprecedented clash. Billed dramatically as the definitive battle for the future of the American working class, the physical space had been stripped of all conventional comforts. There were no cheering crowds, no synchronized applause lines, and absolutely no background energy to feed upon. The format was brutally unforgiving. 3-minute opening statements followed by an extended, unvarnished period of direct exchange, culminating in 2-minute closing arguments. Just two people, 2 microphones, and a moderator. Strikingly, this extraordinarily high-stakes arena had actually been the brainchild of Representative Ocasio-Cortez herself, harboring ambitious dreams of ascending to even higher political stratospheres, with widespread speculation pointing toward a potential Senate run or even a presidential bid. She desperately needed a monumental, defining victory. Her strategic inner circle had convinced her that a direct gladiatorial confrontation with the sitting vice president on her undisputed home turf of economic populism would provide the exact launchpad her career required. Her team had calculated that Vance was inherently vulnerable on the authenticity question, believing his Yale law degree, his venture capital career, and his association with Silicon Valley billionaires like Peter Thiel painted him as a profound hypocrite. In their carefully constructed framing, Vance was nothing more than a working-class cosplayer who had gleefully abandoned his roots for the elite, while AOC stood as the uncorrupted, authentic champion of the people. However, Vance's political strategists had eagerly accepted this dangerous invitation for the exact opposite set of reasons. They possessed a deep, meticulously documented awareness that the representative's carefully curated working-class brand was actually buckling under the immense weight of 6 years of glaring, undeniable contradictions. They had quietly compiled a devastating dossier encompassing her glamorous appearance at the outrageously exclusive Met Gala, the ostentatious Vanity Fair photo shoot, the revelation of exorbitant luxury spending in Puerto Rico, and a troubling constellation of persistent campaign finance irregularities. They knew with absolute certainty that a calm, emotionless, heavily data-driven confrontation would systematically expose the yawning chasm between her fiery socialist rhetoric and her distinctly aristocratic record. But far more importantly, Vance possessed a profound, unassailable weapon that no opposition research could ever manufacture, an actual working-class childhood, complete with the kind of specific, visceral memories that no prep team could ever fabricate. As the clock struck 9 o'clock Eastern Time, the moderator officially commenced the proceedings, drawing in a staggering audience of 30 million Americans. AOC won the coin toss and elected to deliver her opening statement first, making an immediate, highly calculated physical choice. She chose to rise to her feet, addressing the main camera lens with intense, practiced directness. It was a classic display of political dominance, projecting energy and spatial command designed to overwhelm her opponent. Vance remained seated, projecting an aura of unshakable calm and quiet. Methodical patience, the distinct posture of a man who felt absolutely no need to dramatically perform his authority because he inherently knew he possessed it. AOC's opening was a flawless execution of everything her team had rehearsed, fast, passionate, and aimed directly at Vance's authenticity. With a razor-sharp tone, she demanded they be honest about his true identity, accusing him of exploiting his tragic upbringing by selling millions of copies of a book, only to take that lucrative narrative straight to Silicon Valley, where a billionaire funded his political career. She weaponized his time at Yale Law School, his marriage into an elite legal family, and his career as a venture capitalist, accusing him of sitting comfortably in the White House while merely pretending to comprehend the daily struggles of working families. Pointing an accusatory finger directly at him, she explicitly branded him a poverty tourist who had visited hardship, profited immensely from it, and then selfishly pulled the ladder up behind him. Her voice reached a perfectly calibrated crescendo as she declared that Hillbilly Elegy was a business plan designed to sell his background to the highest bidder, while the people he wrote about continued to struggle for groceries, health care. Pivoting flawlessly to the camera, she invoked her sacred origin story, reminding the viewers of her time depending on tips, the panic of a bouncing rent check, and the feeling of being invisible to the powerful. She concluded with a fiery vow to never stop fighting for her community, boldly declaring that no Yale-educated venture capitalist could ever lecture her. The performance was electric, energetic, infinitely quotable, and masterfully tailored for 30-second social media clips. When the moderator turned to Vice President Vance for his highly anticipated rebuttal, the stark contrast in their demeanors became immediately apparent. Vance didn't stand, shuffle papers, or adjust his microphone. He simply leveled his gaze at the representative with an expression of Midwest nice, an outward veil of polite warmth concealing something incredibly sharp underneath. He graciously complimented her rhetorical skills, acknowledging her passionate conviction and understanding exactly why she commanded millions of followers. And then he executed a pause, a brief but profoundly deliberate suspension of time, separating the superficial theatrics from the unvarnished reality about to be unleashed. When he broke the silence, his tone was methodical, noting that speed isn't accuracy, passion isn't evidence, and followers aren't constituents. Zeroing in on her most explosive accusation, he stated he felt compelled to address the poverty tourist label because it was not just wrong about him, but profoundly insulting to everyone who actually grew up the way he did. His voice dropped into the intimate, heavy register of a man preparing to expose a raw wound. He transported the audience back to a specific day when he was 12 years old, recounting the horrific trauma of finding his own mother collapsed and unconscious on the kitchen floor from her third severe overdose. With chilling precision, he described the frantic 911 call, the chaotic arrival of paramedics, and the terrifying solitude of sitting alone in that decaying Middletown house. He vividly described the permeating odor of stale cigarette smoke violently clashing with the harsh chemical stench of severe narcotics, a smell he now knew was the lingering residue of a methamphetamine laboratory. He recounted waiting in that toxic silence until his grandmother arrived to rescue him. The entire television studio plunged into a suffocating, breathless silence. With the room completely tethered to his every word, Vance locked eyes with Ocasio-Cortez and delivered a quiet, devastating blow. He declared that enduring such trauma is not tourism. He didn't visit poverty or write about it from a safe distance. He slept in it, ate cereal for dinner in it, hid in his bedroom during it, and carried the scars of it into the Marine Corps, Yale, and the White House. He then seamlessly pivoted, turning the glaring spotlight directly onto her heavily mythologized background. With surgical precision, he recounted the geographical and financial realities of her youth in Yorktown Heights, one of the wealthiest counties in New York State. He highlighted her father's profession as an architect, her well-funded suburban public school, and her attendance at Boston University with its $40,000 tuition. Striking a deliberately measured tone, he acknowledged there is nothing inherently wrong with a comfortable upbringing, praising it as the American dream. However, the atmosphere turned instantly icy as he delivered his ultimate boundary. He sternly warned her never to sit across from a man who found his mother comatose on a kitchen floor and call him a poverty tourist. The unbridgeable difference between them, he explained with chilling finality, was that he remembered exactly what poverty smells like, and it doesn't smell like Chanel. It smells like a meth lab. The line landed with the devastating force of a highly controlled demolition. AOC's expression displayed a micro movement of genuine shock, the involuntary flicker of a fighter, realizing they had stepped into the ring with an opponent refusing to play by the anticipated rules. Refusing to allow her even a moment to recalibrate, Vance smoothly transitioned the debate from the deeply personal to the undeniable realm of hard data. He noted that while she had shared her narrative, it was time to examine the facts. With the unhurried precision of a litigator, he reached for his digital tablet and directed the audience's attention to September 13th, 2021, the night of the extravagantly exclusive Met Gala. He painted a vivid picture of her attendance at this zenith of high society glamour, arriving in a custom white designer dress emblazoned with "Tax the Rich." He laid out the astonishing economics, a $35,000 ticket price, a dress designed by Aurora James, and an ensemble valued at several $1,000s. He paused to let the sheer hypocrisy marinate, recounting how she claimed she was sending a message about inequality while draped in luxury at an event most Americans could never afford. Tightening the noose, Vance introduced a formal summary of a House Ethics Committee report released in July 2025. Reading directly from the document, he detailed how she had violated the strict House gift rules, received impermissible gifts, severely underpaid for the dress and jewelry, and improperly accepted free admission for her fiancé, Riley Roberts. The committee had ordered her to pay back approximately $3,000, but Vance noted the devil was in the details. He exposed that she had officially listed Riley Roberts as her legitimate spouse to secure his extraordinarily expensive free admission under a specific loophole. However, on her mandatory financial disclosure filings, where declaring a spouse mandates a full public accounting of financial holdings, Roberts was mysteriously absent. Vance let this calculated contradiction hang in the silent air, claiming a spouse to unlock free elite luxuries, but forgetting that status when it required actual financial transparency. Closing the ethics summary, Vance offered a damning assessment. He stated he didn't believe she was grandly corrupt. Rather, she had simply become a master at gaming, the exact same corrupt system she had built her career criticizing. She found the loopholes, exploited them for personal benefit, and when caught, paid the minimum penalty before moving on. That, he argued, was not fighting the system. That was becoming the system, all while ironically parading in a dress demanding taxation of the wealthy. Leaning back, Vance shared how he bought his very first professional suit for his Yale interview at a local Goodwill for $12, wearing the ill-fitting garment with immense pride. He forcefully juxtaposed his $12 thrift store reality against her thousands of dollars in illicit designer luxury worn to a $35,000 gala, questioning how she could ever claim to be the champion of working Americans. Clearly feeling the walls closing in, AOC forcefully interjected, desperately clinging to the legalistic defense that the committee found no willful misconduct and insisting she had proactively tried to comply. Vance immediately seized upon her defensive phrasing with a slow nod. He acknowledged the bureaucratic language, but swiftly transformed it into another crushing indictment of her elite privilege. He pointed out the bitter truth. When working-class people accidentally violate rules, they aren't afforded reports praising their proactive attempts at compliance. They are simply fined, fired, or evicted. Proactive compliance, he delivered with devastating finality, is a luxury just like the Met Gala. AOC subtly crossed her arms, a classic defensive posture, revealing the deep internal panic of a politician whose rehearsed talking points were entirely failing. Relentlessly maintaining momentum, Vance shifted to dissect the centerpiece of her legislative identity, announcing that the Met Gala was far from the only instance where her lifestyle aggressively contradicted her messaging. He turned his forensic focus toward the Green New Deal, confronting the audience with its staggering estimated cost of $93 trillion over a single decade, roughly 4 times the current national debt. He detailed how the immediate cost per household would skyrocket into the tens of thousands through government mandates requiring massive home retrofits, forced appliance replacements, and vehicle transitions. He reminded the viewers of her deeply embarrassing, frequently asked questions, document that proposed providing economic security for those unwilling to work, discussed making commercial air travel obsolete, and even included a widely mocked provision aimed at addressing farting cows. He highlighted the brutal political reality that when the legislation reached the Senate floor, it suffered a catastrophic defeat, with dozens of Democrats voting present rather than attaching their names to it. But Vance masterfully sidestepped the policy debate, clarifying his ultimate target was the glaring chasm between the severe austerity she demanded of working families and the lavish reality of her own documented existence. Producing a compiled dossier, he unleashed a barrage of hypocrisies. He recounted how she publicly scolded school children in Queens to skip disposable razors and entirely eliminate meat and dairy to save the planet. Yet, her campaign expenditure reports revealed a staggering reliance on Uber and Lyft, even when the subway was mere feet away. She extensively used heavily polluting commercial airlines, abandoning the Amtrak system she championed as the greener alternative. She relocated into an ultra-luxury apartment complex in Washington, D.C. And, delivering the crushing blow, he revealed that her latest campaign finance filings exposed a jaw-dropping expenditure of approximately $50,000 of donated funds deliberately blown on ultra-luxury hotels, high-end dining, and the rental of an opulent venue in Puerto Rico to attend a Bad Bunny concert. To brilliantly contrast her $50,000 Caribbean excursion with the gritty reality of her constituents, Vance resurrected the powerful spirit of his mamaw. He painted a vivid picture of his grandmother relentlessly driving a heavily battered truck with over 200,000 miles and a check engine light glowing for 6 years, simply because it was all she could afford. With a completely deadpan delivery, he told the audience exactly how his mamaw would have reacted to a politician ordering her to buy an electric vehicle, quoting her exact profane response, "Son of a bitch, I can barely afford gas." Utilizing the raw authenticity of that moment, Vance delivered a crushing philosophical indictment. He declared the Green New Deal was not a lifeline for struggling families, but an elitist, luxury belief policy engineered for deeply privileged individuals who could afford to obsess over their carbon footprint because their fundamental survival needs were securely met. It was a boutique policy for people who attend Met Galas and Vanity Fair shoots. He stated with undeniable conviction that authentic working-class Americans don't need performative designer dresses. They desperately need gas under $3 and groceries that don't cost 25% more than 2 years ago. That, he emphasized, is the terrifying reality of a Tuesday night around a worn kitchen table in Middletown. Attempting a desperate counteroffensive, AOC insisted the Green New Deal was a massive investment strategy that would generate millions of jobs. Vance instantly neutralized her attack, coolly acknowledging it might create jobs installing solar panels, but would violently obliterate millions of existing careers in the oil, gas, coal, manufacturing, and agricultural sectors. He passionately argued that the very communities she claimed to fight for, Middletown, Youngstown, Flint, and the Rust Belt, would bear the crushing economic devastation of her utopian vision. He pointed out the bitter injustice that the astronomical costs wouldn't be paid by the Westchester County elite, but by families living in places where the idea of skipping meat and dairy is absurd, because meat and dairy represent the entirety of their dinner. He officially branded her proposal a devastating bill that the working class would ultimately pay with their livelihoods, while the insulated elites toasted to saving the planet. Seamlessly shifting gears, Vance moved from abstract policy into the highly controversial waters of her political finances. Adopting the intense focus of a forensic accountant, he systematically opened the vault on her troubled history with campaign finance regulations. He resurrected a deeply damaging 2019 complaint detailing how her former chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarty, allegedly executed a highly suspicious transfer of over $1 million from a political action committee through a labyrinthine network of opaque shell companies to intentionally bypass strict transparency rules. While noting she avoided a personal reprimand, Vance strategically highlighted the suspicious fact that Chakrabarty abruptly departed her office shortly after the complaint was filed. He then rapidly brought the timeline to 2025, detailing a brand new ethics complaint regarding highly questionable expenditures flowing directly from her official taxpayer-funded member allowance to a private dance company. He seamlessly pivoted to the highly inappropriate intersection of her political resources and personal life, reminding viewers of the intense scrutiny surrounding the revelation that her fiancé, Riley Roberts, had inexplicably been granted an official House email account, raising glaring red flags about whether he was secretly on the government payroll. But Vance saved his most bizarre revelation for last. He detailed yet another formal complaint filed just this month, exposing a staggering $20,000 campaign expenditure on mysterious services, vaguely categorized as leadership training and counseling. The devastating catch was the recipient, Dr. Brian Bowl, a psychiatrist explicitly specializing in highly controversial ketamine therapy, whose official medical website completely failed to list generic leadership training among his services. Staring directly across the stage at a reeling AOC, Vance delivered a masterclass in political maneuvering, stating he had no intention of speculating about her private medical treatments. However, he instantly closed the trap by firmly noting that federal campaign funds are strictly prohibited from financing personal expenses. He forcefully argued that funneling $20,000 of donor money to a ketamine psychiatrist under the flimsy guise of leadership training raises glaring ethical questions voters deserve answered. Setting his documents aside, Vance offered a brutal summary. Ethics violations at the Met Gala, $1 million transfer through shell companies, $50,000 in Puerto Rican luxury, a magically appearing spousal designation, a $20,000 payout to a ketamine psychiatrist, and questionable taxpayer funding to a dance company. He delivered the final legal assessment. Collectively, they painted a damning portrait of a politician who loudly campaigned against corruption while running an operation, officially flagged, investigated, and reprimanded more times in 6 years than most average members of Congress accumulate in a career. He delivered a stinging, rhetorical flourish noting the bitter irony that while she constantly ordered the public to tax the rich, it was the Ethics Committee that ordered her to pay back $3,000 for her illicit free dress. Throughout this relentless barrage of evidence, AOC had fallen into a state of absolute paralyzed silence. In a truly unprecedented moment for her highly vocal career, she had not managed to utter a single word in over 4 agonizing minutes. Sensing the structural foundation of her political brand had been demolished, Vance slightly adjusted his posture, pushing his tablet aside and folding his hands, a highly symbolic gesture, signaling he was transitioning into a realm far more profound and intensely personal. Speaking in a hushed, serious tone, he informed her he intended to conclude by returning directly to her explosive accusation, the fundamental question of who truly represents the forgotten working class. Taking a measured breath, he reminded her of the heavy insult she had hurled, claiming he was a poverty tourist and that hillbilly elegy was a calculated business plan. With raw emotion bleeding into his voice, Vance told the nation exactly what writing that book had cost him. He declared it the hardest, most agonizing task he had ever undertaken, harder than legal briefs at Yale or military reports in Iraq. The difficulty stemmed from the requirement to sit alone and meticulously tear open his darkest childhood wounds, vividly describing the sheer terror of growing up in a fractured home where the electricity was abruptly shut off because his mother squandered the utility money on narcotic pills. He recounted the heartbreaking memory of hiding his only pair of shoes beneath his mattress, paralyzed by the justified fear that his mother's transient boyfriends would steal and pawn them for drug money. He spoke of his fierce grandmother, a high school dropout, who remained the singular pillar of stability in his chaotic universe. He looked directly into the camera and declared he wrote that deeply painful book to force the public to understand what the grotesque face of real poverty actually looks like. He emphasized he wasn't writing the sanitized academic version, but the brutal, ugly reality, the version that smells wrong, sounds terrifying, and permanently alters your brain chemistry. And yes, millions purchased it, not because he was a slick salesman peddling a brand, but because struggling Americans opened those pages and instantly recognized the reflections of their own fractured families. Allowing the emotional weight to settle, Vance executed a flawless pivot directly onto AOC's core mythology. He acknowledged with polite respect that her time working as a bartender was indeed real, demanding labor. However, the hammer fell as he clinically dismantled the geographical illusion of her origin story. He bluntly reminded the 30 million viewers that she absolutely did not grow up navigating the harsh streets of the Bronx, but rather in the pristine, wealthy enclaves of Yorktown Heights, where her architect father provided a life of security. He maintained he wasn't attacking her family's success, affirming there is no shame in a comfortable existence. The fundamental unbridgeable problem arises when she deliberately stands on a national stage and falsely claims she possesses a cellular understanding of the agonizing life or death struggle that suffocates genuinely destitute families. When she speaks of this pain, Vance declared she is merely describing a tragic phenomenon she has clinically observed from a safe distance, not a terrifying reality she has actually survived. And the ultimate proof was written entirely in her financial record. Vance noted with crushing finality that individuals who have genuinely lived through the soul-crushing terror of true poverty do not casually incinerate $50,000 of donated funds at luxury Caribbean resorts. They do not eagerly pose on magazine covers draped in $14,000 designer outfits. They do not cynically manipulate ethics loopholes to secure a free dress for a $35,000 gala. He delivered the profound psychological truth The memory of genuine poverty permanently rewrites a human being's relationship with money, altering how they view every expenditure for the rest of their lives. Having laid this flawless groundwork, Vance politely requested permission from the moderator to ask one single, direct question. Turning back to AOC, his voice was entirely stripped of aggression, projecting only intense curiosity. Staring directly into her eyes, he asked, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, when was the absolute last time you were physically present in a room where every single person around you genuinely, truly did not know where their next month's rent was going to come from? And I don't mean on camera, not at a photo opportunity, and not at a staged event in your district. I mean actually being there, truly living inside that room, breathing that air, and carrying that exact same fear. When was the absolute last time? The very moment the final syllable hung in the air, the entire broadcast studio plunged into an incredibly profound, agonizingly heavy silence. AOC instinctively opened her mouth to deliver a rapid-fire retort, but the words died in her throat. She snapped it shut, opened it again, frantically searching for an acceptable political pivot, but absolutely nothing materialized. She was completely paralyzed. The question was a flawlessly engineered, inescapable psychological trap. Her brilliant mind instantly ran the terrifying calculations. If she invented a specific recent moment, internet sleuths would instantly prove she was describing a sanitized campaign stop. If she retreated to her bartending years, she would humiliatingly admit her last brush with financial anxiety ended a decade ago. If she deployed the hollow cliche of claiming she talks to constituents every day, she would permanently validate Vance's devastating premise that she is merely a wealthy, sympathetic observer of poverty. Trapped in a paralyzing paradox with no viable exit strategy, she defaulted to the only remaining option unfolding in excruciating, real-time, absolute, unbroken silence. The silence dragged on, transforming into a devastating eternity. 5 entire seconds agonizingly ticked by, then 7. Then a full, catastrophic 10 seconds of dead air from a woman who had famously built her meteoric career on never being at a loss for words. Those 10 agonizing seconds screamed louder than any fiery speech, vividly illuminating the vast, fraudulent distance between her curated brand and her comfortable elite reality. Vance simply sat and watched her physically struggle. His expression was utterly devoid of arrogant triumph or petty cruelty. His eyes reflected the quiet sorrow of a man who already knew the devastating answer and took no personal joy in watching the unvarnished truth become so brutally visible. Finally, mercifully choosing to break the suffocating silence she simply could not navigate, Vance quietly provided his own answer. He transported the audience back to November 2003 when he was a 19-year-old kid. He recounted the deeply humiliating day his elderly grandmother had been forced to empty her meager savings to pay his rent simply because his mother had just been institutionalized in rehab for the 4th catastrophic time. He described the searing, permanent shame of staring at that thin check, devastated that a frail woman on a fixed income was financially propping up a grown man. He looked directly at AOC and declared he continues to carry the heavy ghost of that specific memory every single day, noting it fundamentally dictates every piece of legislation he touches and every massive federal budget he reviews. He operates this way because he intimately knows the sheer terror of what it feels like when the numbers on a government page literally represent the terrifying boundary between a family eating dinner or going to bed starving. Locking eyes with her one final definitive time, he delivered the fatal summary of their confrontation. That is the fundamental difference between us, Representative. I actually remember, you merely performed. Sensing the devastating finality of the moment, the visibly shaken moderator required a few seconds of on-camera recalibration before finally asking both participants to deliver their closing statements. AOC spoke first, having recovered just enough composure to physically deliver a closing argument. But the fundamental rhythm of her persona had been drastically, permanently altered. The fierce machine gun cadence of her opening was completely extinguished. In its place was a delivery that felt noticeably measured, deeply defensive, and profoundly uncertain. She attempted to pivot away from the personal damage, stiffly stating she rejected the premise of utilizing a painful childhood trauma as a political shield to deflect accountability for conservative policies. She then immediately retreated to the safest, most thoroughly focused group strategy imaginable, launching into a robotic recitation of generic Democratic talking points, attacking the Trump-Vance administration for allegedly slashing taxes for the ultra-wealthy and rolling back environmental protections. The words were technically correct, and the delivery remained somewhat professional, but the underlying electric energy was entirely gone. The millions of viewers eagerly hoping to witness her fiery best were instead forced to watch a deeply rattled politician frantically running a safe, heavily scripted backup program, the passionless default mode. Every conventional politician clings to the moment their fragile aura of authenticity has been totally compromised. Conversely, Vice President Vance's closing statement was incredibly brief, clocking in a full 60 seconds shorter than his allotted time. He utilized this final window not to argue, but to deliver one singular, devastatingly clear philosophical point. He calmly stated he had no intention of boring the audience by endlessly relitigating the minutiae of congressional policy, graciously acknowledging their fundamentally opposing views and affirming his belief that the voters would ultimately decide who was correct. Instead, he posited that there are fundamentally only two distinct types of individuals who loudly invoke the struggles of the working class. The first group consists of those who were actually born into it, who miraculously survived it, and who carry the invisible scars of it forever. For this group, that profound trauma fundamentally shapes their core values, dictates their agonizing decisions, and completely anchors their understanding of how sweeping federal policy will impact vulnerable families huddled around kitchen tables. He noted that while these individuals may eventually escape the brutal grip of poverty, the absolute pinnacle of the American dream, they never forget the terrifying feeling of being trapped within it. The second group, however, merely observes the struggle from afar. They cynically descend into struggling neighborhoods to launch campaigns, continuously reference the pain in viral speeches, and meticulously construct massive, lucrative political brands upon the foundation of other people's misery. But the crucial difference is that the very moment the television cameras switch off and the crowds disperse, this second group immediately retreats to the safety of $50,000 luxury hotels, glamorous Vanity Fair photo shoots, and $35,000 elite galas. Vance charitably conceded his belief that both types of politicians genuinely care about working people. But he delivered the final, inescapable truth. Only one of those two distinct types of people could possibly answer the agonizing question he had asked that evening regarding the terrifying, visceral fear of an unpaid rent check. Staring directly into the primary camera lens, piercing through the screens of 30 million Americans, he delivered his final words with chilling absolute certainty. I was actually there. I profoundly remember, and I will never ever pretend that wearing a witty slogan on a designer dress is an acceptable substitute for carrying that painful memory. Thank you and good night. The defining historical moment of the entire broadcast crystallized and cemented its place in political history within mere minutes of the studio lights going dark. The ultimate takeaway was not the meticulously documented evidence of the Met Gala ethics violations, the devastating economic critique of the Green New Deal, or the labyrinthine compilation of bizarre campaign finance expenditures. The singular, undeniable moment that completely shattered the internet was the trap, the agonizing, excruciating 10 seconds of absolute, unbroken, paralyzed silence from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez immediately following JD. Vance's incredibly simple request to name the absolute last time she had genuinely shared the terrifying financial anxiety of simply not knowing how she was going to afford next month's rent. That specific, utterly devastating clip absolutely exploded across the digital landscape, amassing a mind-boggling 80 million views within the first 24 hours alone, and crossing an astonishing 400 million views by the end of the week. What made this phenomenon so fascinating was that it was absolutely not the loudest or most chaotic political clip of the year. There were no theatrical screaming matches or dramatic walkouts. The sheer, overwhelming devastation derived entirely from its terrifying, inescapable quietness, a completely genuine, deeply human question met with a genuinely paralyzing inability to formulate an answer, producing the unmistakable sound of a manufactured political brand violently crashing into an unyielding wall of reality. The vast ecosystem of social media instantly organized itself around the epic confrontation. The phrase number, "When was the last time?" immediately transformed into a universally recognized, weaponized hashtag of political accountability, relentlessly applied by voters demanding authentic answers from entrenched politicians across the ideological spectrum. Frantic progressive accounts launched highly coordinated campaigns attempting to completely reframe the narrative, falsely accusing Vance of cynically weaponizing his own tragic childhood trauma for cheap political gain. However, this desperate spin operation spectacularly failed to gain any meaningful traction, simply because the millions of everyday voters who watched the debate unfold didn't see a manipulative politician weaponizing anything. They saw a deeply scarred man telling the unvarnished truth about his life, sitting across from a highly polished woman who fundamentally could not do the same. Meanwhile, the devastating counter hashtag, number I remember you perform, instantly morphed into the most widely shared cultural slogan of the entire quarter, appearing practically overnight on mass-produced T-shirts and thousands of car bumper stickers. Most remarkably, the phrase number poverty tourist underwent a complete, totally humiliating reversal. AOC had aggressively introduced the term as her ultimate attack against Vance. Within 48 hours, the internet had completely repossessed the phrase, utilizing it almost exclusively to universally mock and describe AOC herself, the exact woman who had arrogantly worn a tax-the-rich gown to a $35,000 elite party, casually blown $50,000 of donor money at luxury Caribbean resorts, and found herself completely incapable of answering a basic question regarding the financial anxiety of the very constituents she loudly claimed to represent. The catastrophic fallout for Representative Ocasio-Cortez was highly measurable, immediate, and structurally devastating. Internal polling conducted exclusively within her own home district in the Bronx revealed an unprecedented, catastrophic 7-point plummet in her overall approval ratings within a mere 2 weeks, driven entirely by the very working-class, blue-collar constituents who instantly recognized the massive disconnect between her glamorous reality and their daily struggles. Her legendary fundraising apparatus experienced a massive, unprecedented dip as the vast army of passionate grassroots donors abruptly paused their contributions, adding fuel to the fire. The highly damaging Ethics Committee findings regarding her illicit activities at the Met Gala violently re-entered the relentless news cycle with the deeply hypocritical spouse discrepancy instantly transforming into a massive standalone investigative scandal. Consequently, her highly anticipated ambitions for a monumental Senate run violently stalled and collapsed as highly influential major Democratic megadonors quietly redirected their massive financial support toward other candidates. The brutal political calculus was simple. any candidate completely incapable of answering when was the last time on live television would inevitably and relentlessly face that exact same devastating question in every single subsequent debate for the entire duration of a high-stakes national campaign. Conversely, for Vice President Vance, the debate instantly solidified into the absolute defining triumph of his entire vice presidency. The chilling line about the meth lab, the relatable Goodwill suit story, the authentic mama anecdote, and above all else, the devastating deployment of the final question, each instantly became legendary touchstones in the broader national conversation defining authentic working-class representation. Sales of Hillbilly Elegy experienced another massive, unprecedented surge. But vastly more significantly, the debate fundamentally and permanently shifted the entire national narrative, proving that the case for conservative economic policy could be flawlessly executed not by utilizing dry, abstract theories, but by violently anchoring arguments in the undeniable, traumatic lived experience of someone completely failed by the exact systems progressives constantly claim to champion. The true, profound impact of this monumental clash, however, was not ultimately measured in the sterile halls of Washington or the chaotic digital battlegrounds of social media, but in the quiet, desperate corners of the real America that both politicians fiercely claim to represent. Deep in the heart of Middletown, Ohio, a woman named Crystal Atkins sat silently watching the debate unfold on a small television inside the brightly lit break room of the local opioid recovery clinic where she exhaustingly worked as a dedicated addiction counselor. She was intimately, painfully familiar with the exact geography of the despair Vance had described, having actually grown up a mere 4 blocks away from the very house where Mama had fiercely raised him. She knew the decaying neighborhood. She knew the terrifying chemical smell he had vividly described. She had tragically smelled it herself, lingering in completely different, dilapidated houses on different dark nights, looking into the terrified eyes of completely different, forgotten children, desperately wondering why the fractured adults in their chaotic lives simply could not stop breaking themselves apart. When Vance painfully described finding his own mother collapsed on the kitchen floor, Crystal instinctively pressed her hand tightly over her mouth, not out of shock, but out of a profound sense of recognition. She recognized the haunting specificity of the cold reality of the floor, the desperate panic of the 911 call, and the soul-crushing terror of the waiting alone. It was profoundly real in a way highly polished political speeches fundamentally never are. When AOC completely failed to answer the final question, Crystal slowly looked around the fluorescent break room. 3 other exhausted counselors were silently watching the screen. One of them, a hardened woman named Teresa, who had fought her way to being clean for 11 incredibly difficult years, was quietly crying. She was not shedding tears over partisan politics. She was crying over the overwhelming, validating reality that someone had finally possessed the courage to stand on national television and accurately describe exactly what true, soul-crushing poverty actually sounds like when you aren't cynically attempting to package and sell it. That's our boy, Crystal whispered quietly into the silence of the room. That's our boy from Middletown. And then she simply stood up and went right back to work, because the next desperate patient was already waiting. Hundreds of miles away, nestled deeply within the affluent, manicured borders of Yorktown Heights, New York, the very wealthy Westchester suburb where AOC had spent her incredibly comfortable formative years. A retired public school teacher named Dorothy Chen sat quietly watching the exact same debate alongside her husband. She had dedicated 31 years of her life to teaching at Yorktown High School and fondly remembered AOC as an incredibly bright, fiercely ambitious young student who had eagerly participated in local science fairs. Dorothy had always felt a profound sense of pride when her former student unexpectedly stormed the halls of Congress, and she had absolutely never voted for a Republican candidate in her entire life. But when Vice President Vance looked directly into the camera and bluntly stated, You didn't grow up in the Bronx. You grew up in Yorktown Heights. Dorothy slowly, deliberately set her teacup down on the table. She turned and looked directly at her husband. He's absolutely right, she stated quietly, with undeniable conviction. She grew up right here. This is an incredibly nice, wealthy town. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. She slowly picked her teacup back up, letting the reality settle before adding with a sigh, but she should just admit it. So, if you have remained engaged through this monumental breakdown, you have just witnessed the exact defining historical moment when a carefully manufactured political brand violently collided with an undeniable, traumatic human biography. And the unvarnished biography emerged completely victorious. Smash that like button right now if you instantly knew the answer to when was the last time, long before AOC was paralyzed into silence. And make sure to subscribe for even more incredible, in-depth breakdowns of the rare moments when unvarnished truth violently cuts straight through political performance. Share this video with every single hardworking, working-class American who is completely exhausted from being theoretically represented by wealthy elites who have absolutely never genuinely shared their daily financial struggle. Drop a comment below and tell us, when was your last time? When was the absolute last time you genuinely did not know where the rent money was coming from? Because the millions of resilient people who truly know that terrifying feeling instantly recognized JD Vance tonight, and they absolutely recognized the glaring, hollow void that was entirely missing from the other side of the debate stage. Turn on all notifications because this single debate has permanently changed the entire national conversation. The investigations into the Ethics Committee findings are still highly active. The massive questions surrounding the campaign finance irregularities remain entirely unanswered. And the millions of working-class voters who watch this all unfold tonight are still carefully deciding who truly, authentically speaks for them. May God bless every single fierce grandmother who single-handedly held a fractured family together when absolutely nobody else could. May God bless every terrified child who was forced to dial 911 for a broken parent. May God bless every single hard-working person who proudly purchased their very first professional suit off the racks of a Goodwill. And may God bless the true, enduring American dream, which absolutely does not begin on the exclusive red carpet of the Met Gala, and definitely does not end at a glamorous Vanity Fair photo shoot. It begins on a cold, sticky kitchen floor in Middletown, Ohio, with a traumatized 12-year-old boy who simply decided that his agonizing story would absolutely not end in the exact same darkness where it began. He profoundly remembers, she merely performs. And 30 million people now finally know the absolute truth.